And I wonder how I can talk about the life of Saul in just 2 classes, and I got the feeling sorry for myself. Then I realized Cody has 2 lessons on the life of David. So I feel a lot more sorry for him than I do for myself on that. But last week we began looking at what brought about Saul as being king. And you remember that because of Samuel's sons who were ungodly and not doing the right things, the people were getting tired of it and they wanted to have a king. And they wanted to be like the kings, wanted to be like the nations round about them, right? And that was one big problem that they had, right? When we start trying to be like everybody else, then we're going to find ourselves in trouble. And so we talked about that scenario. We talked about how that, well, let's pick up in chapter 10. Remember in chapter 10 that Saul had a discussion with Samuel. And Samuel tells Saul that he's going to be the next king. And you'll notice that here in chapter 10, he is going to give him several signs that are going to take place, several things that are going to happen to make him realize that he is the one whom God has chosen, the one that the people wanted. We're going to see that he says in verse 2 of chapter 10, you're going to find 2 men. Down in chapter 3, there shall be other men that show up. 3 men show up in chapter 3. There will be prophets that show up in chapter 5. You're going to receive the Spirit of the Lord, and you're going to prophesy. And as you go through the rest of that chapter, we see that all those things came to pass. Now, let's pick up in verse 17. Here in chapter 17, Samuel is now going to present Saul to the people as the next king. It says, "And Samuel called the people together unto Jehovah to Mizpah, and he said unto the children of Israel, Thus saith Jehovah, the God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all the kingdoms that oppress you." So here Samuel is reminding them what they're giving up in trying to have a king to be like the nations round about them. Here is Jehovah. He has delivered you. But verse 19 says, "But ye have this day rejected your God, who himself saveth you out of all your calamities and your distresses. And ye have said unto him, Nay, but we will set a king over us." And so they had rejected the one who had saved them all these years, brought them out of Egypt, protected them, and they rejected God. "Now, therefore, present yourselves before Jehovah by tribe." And so all the tribes are going to be coming in. He's going to be doing some kind of a Urim and Thummim thing. You know, we don't know too much about that, other than God would use that many times miraculously to select things. And so they were selecting all the nations. It came down to the tribe of Benjamin, and then it came down to the family of Saul, and then it came to Saul. Verse 24 says, "And Samuel said to all the people, See him whom Jehovah hath chosen, that there is none like him among the people. And all the people shouted and said, Long live the king." Notice verse 25. "Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom." That is, he's given them details and various requirements associated with the kingdom, and he wrote it in a book and laid it before Jehovah. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul also went to his house to Gibeah, and there went with him the host whose heart God had touched. But then notice verse 27. Have you ever known anybody who's never satisfied? Have you? Never satisfied. You ever heard the old saying, they wouldn't be satisfied as they'd hung with a new rope, right? Well, verse 27 says, "But certain worthless fellows said, 'How shall this man save us?' And they despised him and brought him no present, but he held his peace." And I find it interesting here that there are always those who will not accept God's decisions. God decided, you wanted a king, I'm going to give you a king. He gave them Saul, the kind of king they wanted, and they weren't happy with it. But notice here the phrase, "but he held his peace." Saul here is seen as enduring ridicule. Right off the bat, he gets ridiculed, but he held his peace. One of the things that leaders always get is what? Ridicule. And it started right off the bat. And here we see a mentality about Saul that he's going to overlook these petty things here. And as we're going to see here, going in chapter 11, that Saul is going to have probably his one glorious moment in history, at least that we have record of. You'll notice here in chapter 11, beginning in verse 1, "Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh-Gilead," which was a town in Gilead that had close connections with Benjamin. "And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, 'Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee.' And Nahash the Ammonite said unto them, 'On this condition will I make it with you, that all your right eyes be put out, and I will lay it for reproach against Israel.'" So him doing this very thing is a reproach against Israel, a reproach against God. And it says in verse 3, "And the elders of Jabesh said unto him, 'Give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers unto all the borders of Israel, and then if there be none to save us, we will come unto thee.'" You'll notice here in verses 4 through 11 that the people begin to mourn and to cry over this situation. And it says, "Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul and spake these words in the ears of the people, and all the people lifted up their voice and wept. And behold, Saul came following the oxen out of the field, and Saul said, 'What aileth the people that they weep?' And they told him the words of the men of Jabesh." Verse 6, "And the Spirit of God came mightily upon Saul when he heard those words, and his anger was kindled greatly." Why? Because they had laid it for a reproach to Israel. He was coming to the aid of the people. Verse 7, "And he took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all the borders of Israel by the hand of the messenger, saying, 'Whatsoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, it shall be done unto his oxen.' And the dread of Jehovah fell upon the people, and they came out as one man." Here is a king that is demanding action of the people. Your brethren are in trouble. It's time for us to come to their aid, and he demands such to occur. And so they take together 330,000 people, which is half of their fighting men, according to Numbers chapter 1, fought out, and they smote the Ammonites. A powerful win for King Saul. But then notice verse 12. "And the people said unto Samuel, Who is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men, that we may put them to death." You remember back at the end of chapter 10, there were some who were not liking Saul being chosen as their king. And who is this guy anyway, right? And so now the people are saying, let's go get those guys and let's deal with them. Verse 13, "And Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today Jehovah hath brought deliverance in Israel." I see in this passage that Saul does not hold a grudge. He let it go. He's the king. He knows he's the king. And it doesn't matter what anybody else is saying. Then, verse 14, Samuel said to the people, "Come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom." And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before Jehovah. So, at this point, Saul's doing pretty good, isn't he? Doing things right. He's got a humble attitude. He's calling the people to fight against the enemies. Doing great. In chapter 12, Samuel is going to affirm his innocence before the people. But then notice, he's going to remind them of something. In verses 6 through 15, Samuel is going to rehearse God's dealing with Israel throughout the years. He tells how God has dealt with them and protected them. And then in verse 12 it says, "And when ye saw that Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, came against you, ye said unto them, Nay, but a king shall reign over us, when Jehovah your God was your king. Now therefore, behold, the king whom ye have chosen, whom ye have asked for, and behold, Jehovah has set a king over you." Now, you asked for a king, I give you a king. Now there's something I'm requiring of you. Verse 14. "If ye fear Jehovah, and serve him, and hearken unto his voice, and not rebel against the commandment of Jehovah, and both ye and also your king that reigneth over you, to be followers of Jehovah your God, well." Things are going to go well for you. Even though you went against me, if you'll do what I say from here on out, things are going to go well with you. Verse 15, "But if ye will not hearken unto the voice of Jehovah, but rebel against the commandment of Jehovah, then will the hand of Jehovah be against you as it was against your fathers." Down in verse 17 it says, in the middle part, "And ye shall know and see that your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of Jehovah, in asking you for a king." You know that what you have asked for in a king with Saul is going to come back and haunt you. Notice the response down in verse 19. "And all the people said unto Samuel, Pray for thy servant unto Jehovah thy God, that we die not." Do you think they realize the big mistake they've made? He says, they say, "For we have added unto all our sins this evil, to ask us for a king." So they realize they've made a big mistake. But you know what? When we make mistakes, sometimes we're going to have to reap the consequences of those mistakes, right? We're going to have to suffer for what we have chosen to do. Do you think Israel is going to suffer for what they've chosen to do? Do you remember Samuel reminded them earlier of all the things that's going to happen to them if they want to have a king like the nations round about them? He warns them about it. He says in verse 20, "And Samuel said unto the people, Fear not, ye have indeed done all this evil, yet, even though you've done this evil thing in asking for a king, yet turn not aside from following Jehovah, but serve Jehovah with all your heart, and turn ye not aside." Because he tells them, "For Jehovah will not forsake his people." He says in verse 24, "Only fear Jehovah, serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider how great things he hath done. But if ye shall still do wickedly, ye shall be consumed, both ye and your king." It's interesting that as we come into chapter 13, the Philistines, who have always and will always be a thorn in the flesh of the Israelites, were, as normal, giving them great difficulty. And you're going to notice here in verses 1 through 4 that Saul is going to defeat the Philistines at Gibeah. They're getting tired of this. It says in verse 3, "And Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Gibeah." They're tired of this. And so now they're going to declare war, and they're going to begin to fight against the Philistines. They're tired of being under their thumb. And so they win a battle at Gibeah. And so all the people now are gathered together after Saul in Gilgal. So we have a large number of about 3,000 people of Israelites that are gathered in Gibeah. Now, look what's about to happen. You'll notice here that the Philistines, they don't like getting their tail kicked, right? So what do? They gather forces together. Look at verse 5. And the Philistines assembled themselves together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and encamped in Michmash eastward of Bethaven. And so here you have, they lost a battle over here. Now what do? They gather together a great force. So what do we have here? We have 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and an innumerable host of foot soldiers coming up to fight against Israel, whose number was what? 3,000. So would you say they're outnumbered? What did they do? Verse 6. And when the people saw that they were in a strait, or that they were in trouble, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves, and in thickets, and in rocks, and in coverts, and in pits. And the last part of verse 7 says, and all the people followed him, trembling. They were all scared to death because of the great number of Philistines that were here and the small number of Israelites. They ought to be afraid. You know why? Because they rejected their king, the God of heaven. I want you to flip over in your Bibles with me to Leviticus chapter 26. Today, in the devotional message that Stephen gave, he gave a great expository sermon of Leviticus chapter 26. And there was something in there that I saw that really impacted me in connection with what we have right now. We've got this innumerable host of Philistines coming down upon the Israelites, a small number of 3,000, and they're all scared to death. They're hiding in the caves. They don't know what to do. Notice, beginning in verse 3, he's going to talk about some conditional commandments. He says, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then I will give your rain in the season and the land. So he talks about how that if they will do what God says, he's going to bless them in the land. Beginning in verse 6, it says, and I will give peace in the land, and ye shall lie down, none shall make you afraid, and I will cause evil beasts to cease out of the land, neither shall ye be saved through the sword. And here's what I want us to see, verses 7 and 8. And ye shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword, and 5 of you shall chase 100. 100 shall chase 10,000, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. What does that tell you about when God's on your side? It don't matter what the odds are, right? If God's on their side, those 3,000 Israelites could easily defeat the Philistines of all that great number. But that's the key, right? They have to have God as their king. They have to rely upon God to help them through there. Now, I'll have to get away from that. Well, we'll spend all of our time in there. But the whole point that I want you to realize is that God can save with many or with a few. And so they really had nothing to worry about if they would be obedient to God. But guess what? Didn't turn out that way. Let's begin reading in verse 8 back in 1 Samuel 13. And he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. And Saul said, bring hither the burnt offering to me, and the peace offering, and he offered the burnt offering, which he did not have the authority to do. You might want to compare Leviticus 17, verses 8 and 9 with that. And it came to pass that as soon as he made an end of the offering, the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him that he might salute him. And Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, that thou camest not within the days appointed, and the Philistines assembled themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, now the Philistines came down upon me in Gilgal, and I have not entreated the favor of Jehovah. I forced myself, therefore, and offered the burnt offering." Saul's pretty good at making excuses, isn't he? He says, "Man, we have a big enemy out here, and we've not made sacrifice to the Lord yet. And you're not here. You weren't here. So I took it upon myself." He says, "I forced myself to do this." And when you say, "I forced myself to do this," you knew that what you were doing was not right. Here's what I want us to gather from this. An emergency or trying times does not give us the right to change God's law. What do we call that? Situation ethics, right? A situation dictates what I do. No, it does not. God's word dictates. He found himself in a horrible strait. So he said, "I got to make a sacrifice so we can defeat them." Had he forgotten about Leviticus chapter 26, that God can defeat the great armies with a few? Verse 13. And Samuel said to Saul, "Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of Jehovah thy God." That's always the problem, isn't it? Look over in Isaiah chapter 55 for a moment. In Isaiah chapter 55, notice with me verses 8 and 9. Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith Jehovah. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So Saul thought he was going to do it his way, right? He didn't wait on the Lord. He didn't wait on the prophet. I wonder sometimes if things aren't happening as fast as we would like them to happen, if we take matters into our own hands and do things our way instead of God's way. In verse 14, back in 1 Samuel 13, it says, "But now thy kingdom shall not continue. Jehovah has sought him a man after his own heart, and Jehovah hath appointed him to be prince over his people, because thou hast not kept that which Jehovah commanded thee." What we need to realize from that is there is always a cost to disobedience. Saul now is going to what? He's going to lose his kingship to another. And they had some difficulty. We're going to see in the next chapter. We really won't have time to go in that chapter because I don't want to not get into chapter 15. But they're fighting the Philistines. Jonathan has great bravery. They got him on the run. And Saul says, "If any man eats or drinks while we're in battle, the death penalty comes to you." Who didn't hear that request? Who didn't hear that command? Jonathan. And he took some honey along the way, and it says his eyes were lightened. He gained the energy and the strength that we need. Overall, when I look at that, I think sometimes a leader does not think about the welfare of his people. Saul didn't think about anything but winning the war, even at the expense of the people, his army. So, that was Saul's second big mistake, and he finally decided, we're not doing any good in battle. We must be something wrong here. Somebody must have disobeyed my command, and guess who it was? Jonathan. What was Saul going to do? He's going to kill him. But the people came to his aid. It's not going to happen here. So let's pick up in chapter 15 in our last remaining time. In chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, we have Saul's third and fatal mistake. In verses 1 through 5, we see that the Amalekites, their treachery is remembered. And it says in verse 1, "And Samuel said unto Saul, Jehovah sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel." He's reminding him of the serious responsibility that you have, Saul. You are king over my people. Now therefore, hearken thou unto the voice of the words of Jehovah. Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, I have marked that which Amalek did to Israel, how he set against him in the way when he came upon Egypt. You might want to look at Exodus chapter 17 and Deuteronomy 25 for more detail on that. But notice verse 3. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant, suckling, ox, sheep, camel, and ass. So when God tells Saul to go and smite the Amalekites, what does he tell him to do? Wipe them off the face of the earth, right? That's kind of a hard thing for us to grasp in our minds, to kill women and children. Without saying anything else. And when we use our own thinking about this, we get ourselves in trouble. Will not the God of heaven do what is right? Yes or no? Everything God does is right, even if we don't understand it. Am I right? So we can question this all we want, but all I have to know is God said this is what's going to be done, and it's right. But as a side note, we might also realize that He is going to stop the spread of evil influence by demolishing this whole people. God does what is right, even though we may not understand it. So, in verse 4 it says, And Saul summoned the people and numbered them in Telamah, and 200,000 men, 10,000 foot soldiers of Judah. And Saul came to the city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. So his charge was to go and to destroy the Amalekites. Well, in verses 6 through 9, you're going to notice that Saul smites Amalek, but not quite the way he was supposed to do it. It says there in verse 6, And Saul said unto the Kenites, now the Kenites were related to the Jews, Judges chapter 1 and verse 16. They were kinfolk. He says, Go depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them, for you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. The innocent were going to be set free. In verse 7 it says, And Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah, as thou goest to Sur, that is before Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen and all the fatlings and of the lambs and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed. Saul won the battle, but not as ordered, right? We see here that, as we're going to see as we go through this text, that partial obedience is not obedience at all. Would you say Saul did part of what God said? Did he do all of what God said? Well, in reality, what did he do? He did it his own way, right? Who is that? Who's that old singer? You know, you old guys know this. I did it my way. Who was that? Frank Sinatra? Well, I guess he was singing Frank Sinatra when he was in battle here. And I did it my way. Do y'all know who Frank Sinatra is? College guys? Okay. So in verses 10 through 23, Saul's sin is now going to be exposed by Samuel. Verse 10 says, Then came the word of Jehovah to Samuel, saying, It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he is turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And Samuel was wroth, and he cried unto Jehovah all night long. All night. Some say that the ends justify the means. God says it's disobedience. Sin should cause us to grieve like it did Samuel right here, right? He prayed all night. He was saddened over what Saul did. Verse 12, And Samuel was early to meet Saul in the morning, and it was told Samuel, saying, Saul, come to Carmel. And behold, he has set up a monument, and turned and passed on and went down to Gilgal. Saul said, I like this. Look at verse 13. Samuel came to Saul. Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of Jehovah. I have performed the commandments of Jehovah. Had he? Partially. It's self-deception. In reality, when you only obey part of it, you're not obeying any of it in reality, right? Samuel said, verse 14, What meaneth then the bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? If you have done what God said, I ought not to be hearing this. What is the meaning of this? So Saul said, Oh man, I really messed up. Forgive me. Is that what he did? Verse 15, Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice unto Jehovah thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. So he's blaming everybody on the bad stuff, and the good stuff, that's what he was involved in, right? Right. Exactly right. It's the famous passing the buck, right? Always blaming somebody else. So then Samuel said in verse 16 unto Saul, Stay. In other words, stop. In other words, shut up. Quit lying. What was that David says? Talk to me with your mouth shut. Shut your mouth when you're talking to me, right? That's what he's saying. Shut up. I will tell you what Jehovah has said to me this night. And he said unto him, I can just see Saul say on. Samuel said, though thou wast little in the house, I guess we better skip on down here. Verse 19, wherefore didst thou not obey the voice of Jehovah? Did he say, why didn't you obey me all the way? What did he say? You didn't obey at all. And verse 20, and Saul said unto Samuel, yea, I have obeyed the voice of Jehovah. Do you think sometimes people lie to themselves, thinking they have done something when in reality they have not? Doing only part of God's law is not true obedience. He says in verse 21, but the people took of the spoil, sheep, oxen, the chief of the devoted things, and sacrificed unto Jehovah thy God in Gilgal. So he's doing what still? He's still blaming the people. Do you remember back in, what was it, chapter 13, when he says, if y'all don't come to battle, verse 12, chapter 12, if you don't come to battle, I'm going to cut up oxen and all your oxen. If you don't do what I say, I'm king, right? And now he says what? They wouldn't obey me. It's their fault. So what did Samuel say? Verses 22 and 23. Samuel said, hath Jehovah as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices and obeying the voice of Jehovah? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is idolatry and teraphim. Because thou hast rejected the word of Jehovah, he also hath rejected thee. You're rejected. I want more than you just going through the motions. I want you to sacrifice, but I want you to do it the way I want it done, right? Yeah, you said you brought back all this good stuff to sacrifice to me, but that's not what I want because I told you to destroy all that. Verse 24, and Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. What's he going to do here? He's going to change his arguments. What are you going to do? I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandments of Jehovah thy God and thy word, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Again, what's he doing? Blaming somebody else for his sin. And as we're going to see at the end of this chapter, that he is going to remove the kingdom from him, and from there on out, Saul is going to have a hard time. He's going to have evil spirit among him. He's going to chase David all of his life. And this is going to be a sad ending for King Saul.